Are you really judging a man by a faded patch while the flag rope clicks in the cold air? They mocked him again, pressed their laughs into the morning breeze, never noticing how his shoulders tightened just once. Then the light shifted across that worn navy patch, and in the hush between footsteps and a heartbeat, the truth of his service flickered like a porch bulb holding on. Still quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back. Maple Creek's fall fare always smelled like cinnamon and dust. The rides weren't much, just a rusted Ferris wheel and a carousel that squeaked on every turn, but the town loved it anyway. Under a row of fluttering orange pennants, Hank Rourke stood by the side entrance, holding the metal gate steady as the morning crowd trickled in. His jacket was the same one he'd worn for years, a navy blue field coat gone soft at the seams, with a faded navy patch just visible near the shoulder, where the fabric had thinned. He shifted his weight, letting an older couple pass through. The woman leaned on her husband's arm, and Hank quietly lifted the gate a little higher so she wouldn't catch her purse on the latch. He didn't say much, just dipped his head and offered a warm, automatic morning ma'am the way he always did. A few feet away, 3 members of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association clustered around the folding table where the volunteer sign-in sheet lay. Clipboards in hand, they watched Hank, the way some folks watched a stray dog, curious but mostly annoyed it was there. One of them, a man with a perfectly pressed flannel shirt and a badge that said Event Coordinator, nudged his friend with an elbow. "Look at that jacket," he said, low but not low enough. "Those patches don't even look real." His friend snorted. "Maybe he picked it up at the thrift store. $2 a hero." The woman with them let out a laugh that was more of a sharp little exhale. Honestly, people will wear anything for attention these days. Then a little louder, just enough to float on the cool October air, one of them said it, in a sing-song voice meant to sting. They mocked that faded navy patch like it was some thrift store fake. Hank heard it. Of course he did. Sound traveled easily in an open lot like this, between the hay bales and the food trucks and the portable stage. But he didn't turn his head. He didn't ask them to repeat it. He just kept holding the gate steady, as bedrock as another family squeezed past with a stroller and a bag of apples. "Thank you, sir," the young mother said, a little rushed. "You're welcome," Hank replied, voice soft. "Enjoy the fare now." The HOA trio went back to their clipboards, already bored with their own joke. But behind them, near the row of game booths, where someone was still taping up a crooked sign that read, "Ring Toss," a boy watched the whole thing. Jamie stood half in shadow, half in the weak autumn sun, hands jammed into the pockets of a hoodie that was just a little too big. He'd been dropped off early while his mom finished a shift at the diner, told to look around, but don't touch anything yet. So he'd wandered the way kids do, and somehow he'd ended up where he could see everything, and no one could see him. He noticed the way Hank's shoulders tightened just a fraction when the laughter floated over. Not enough for anyone else to pick up on. Just a small, almost invisible flinch, like a wire pulled taut, and then released. Jamie's eyes tracked the faded patch on the man's sleeve. The colors were worn edges, frayed threads pulling loose in tiny places. Still, the shape was clear if you knew what you were looking at. Some people saw old cloth. Jamie saw something closer to a story someone had forgotten to tell. A gust of wind tugged at the fair banners, sending a few brown leaves skating across the gravel. Hank reached up slow and unhurried and pinched the edge of his sleeve between thumb and forefinger. For a second, he pressed the fabric over the patch, covering it, hiding it from the world, like it was a photo he hadn't decided to show anyone yet. He looked toward the parking lot, toward the distant line of trees, then back to the gate. No answer for the laughter. No complaint. Just another small nod as an older man with a cane shuffled through and gave him a grateful smile. "Appreciate you being here," the old man said. "Happy to help," Hank answered. Jamie shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling something he couldn't name settle in his chest. The way adults talked when they thought nobody important was listening, the way this quiet man kept doing his job anyway, it all stacked up into a kind of picture that didn't feel fair at all. He glanced from the HOA table to Hank's worn jacket, to the patch that didn't look fake at all from where he stood. The laughter had already faded into the general noise of set-up popcorn machines warming up microphone checks from the main stage, the low hum of generators, but Jamie kept hearing it long after everyone else had moved on. They didn't look at Hank again. They didn't need to. In their minds, they'd already decided who he was. They had no idea who they were talking to. The Maple Creek Diner sat at the corner of Main and Willow, the kind of place where the windows fogged on cool mornings, and the bell over the door chimed like it had a memory attached. Hank Rourke slipped inside just after the breakfast rush, shaking a few loose leaves off his coat, before taking the booth closest to the wall. From there he could see the fairgrounds through the front window. The string lights still dim in the daylight, the vendors rolling up their canvas awnings. "Morning, Hank," the waitress said as she came over with a steaming pot. She didn't bother asking if he wanted a refill. She just tipped the pot over his mug with a smile. "Refills on the house, Hank. Your patch pays ahead." He managed a small grin. "I'll have to tell the patch it's pulling its weight." She laughed, the sound warm and familiar, then drifted off to the next table. The diner wasn't loud, but it carried a soft hum, clinking utensils, an oldies station playing under the noise the occasional hiss of the griddle when someone ordered eggs late in the morning. Two men sat in the booth behind Hank talking in voices meant to be private, but not quite soft enough. "Bet he never did real Navy work," one said, tapping his spoon against a half-empty bowl of oatmeal. "Sure looks that way," the other replied. "Some folks just like to look important." Hank didn't turn around. He reached for the edge of his sleeve where the faded patch sat stitched into the worn fabric. He rubbed a thumb over it, feeling the raised threads, the places where the blue had washed to gray, the corners where the stitching had loosened. The patch had outlasted plenty of things in his life, but it wasn't much to look at now. He didn't mind. Not really. Still hearing strangers guess at stories they didn't know had a way of settling in the chest like a cool stone. The diner door chimed again. Jamie stepped in, hands pushed into his hoodie pockets, scanning the room, as though unsure whether he was allowed to be there. When he spotted Hank, he hesitated, then slid into the booth across the aisle, close enough to watch, but far enough to pretend he wasn't. He saw the patch before he saw Hank's face. It wasn't the kind of thing you missed up close. The light from the window hit it just right, catching on the frayed edges, making the faded colors look almost silver. Jamie's eyes narrowed a little, not in doubt, but in curiosity. The kind that said he knew grown-ups didn't always say what they meant. Hank let the sleeve fall back into place. He nodded to the boy politely. "You're up early." "My mom works mornings," Jamie said. "I just wander until the fair opens." "It'll be a good one this year," Hank said. "Weather's holding." Jamie shrugged like he didn't want to give away too much interest. "I saw you at the gate. People were kind of loud." Hank didn't take the bait. Folks say things. Doesn't make them true. Jamie didn't answer. He just studied the patch again as the waitress returned with a fresh plate for someone nearby. The air smelled of butter and maple syrup, the diner's usual comfort. Outside, a distant electric buzz rattled the window. Hank glanced toward the fairgrounds. One of the string light lines flickered a jittery pulse along the wire like something was struggling to hold on. "That's not good," he murmured. A few minutes later, after he settled his bill, Hank stepped out into the crisp air. Jamie followed at a distance, not close enough to seem attached, but close enough to see what Hank saw. The closer they got to the fair's main path, the more obvious the problem became. Lights, sputtering booth signs, blinking unevenly, a faint clicking from somewhere behind the vendor stalls. Hank crouched near one of the power boxes, fingers hooked around the edge of the panel. He lifted it gently, checking connections the way someone might check a heartbeat. Probably just a loose clamp, he said under his breath. Before he could tighten anything, a sharp voice snapped across the space. "Sir, liability rules, step back." Martha from the HOA marched toward him, clipboard raised like a shield. Hank froze exactly where he was, hands still hovering near the wiring but not touching. "I wasn't," he began. "Step back," she repeated. So he did. No argument, no shift in tone. He simply stood, brushed his hands off, and stepped aside as if giving space was something he'd practiced for years. Jamie's face tightened. He watched Martha bustle off, satisfied she'd handled some imagined crisis, then looked at Hank again. The lights flickered once more, longer this time, almost like a shiver across the fairgrounds. Still, the lights kept flickering like they were calling someone. Jamie found himself drifting toward the edge of town that afternoon, the sun lowering behind the maples that lined Old Birch Road. Hank had walked off toward the fairgrounds, after the diner quiet as ever, and Jamie wasn't sure why he cared, but he did. Something about the man didn't fit the way people spoke about him. A creak sounded from the porch of a white farmhouse nearby. Old Will Henderson sat on his porch swing, pushing gently with the side of his boot. The swing rocked in a steady rhythm, the kind that made conversation feel easier than usual. "You look like you're carrying a question," son Will said. Jamie shuffled closer. "Mr. Will, what did Hank do before Maple Creek, I mean?" Will let out a slow breath, watching the sun catch the dust in the air. Hank served as an aircraft system Navy technician. The kind folks depend on but rarely notice. The swing kept its gentle pace. He was one of those men who fixed things before anyone knew they were broken. Jamie looked down the road, as if Hank might reappear at any moment. "People don't seem to believe that." "People believe whatever story is loudest," Will said. "Truth tends to whisper." The porch boards glowed gold as the afternoon light slanted across them. Hank had walked by earlier, pausing just long enough to tug at his coat when Will waved. The faded patch on his sleeve had caught the sun, then its worn edges lit up like an old memory someone had handled too many times. Jamie remembered the way Hank had brushed it with his thumb, like checking on something private. Down on Elm Street, the HOA members were gathering in front of the community bulletin board. Their voices carried up the block, sharp, hurried, certain. "He's not qualified. Better to keep him away from anything electrical. He's trying to look important." Their verdict came fast, as if they'd been waiting all day to deliver it. No vote, no real discussion, just a conclusion wrapped in authority. Hank was there when Jamie walked past. Hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way that didn't match the sting of what he'd just heard. "It's all right," Hank said when Jamie approached. "They mean well. They're just careful." "That's not what I heard," Jamie muttered. Hank gave a small, soft chuckle. "I don't have to be the one in charge. I'll just help where I can." Jamie caught it, the faint shift in Hank's eyes, something tired flickering just under the surface. It was gone almost as quickly, but Jamie had seen it. Like the man had learned long ago how to swallow disappointment before anyone noticed. They walked together toward the fairgrounds as the evening crept in. Booths were nearly ready, signs painted the scent of kettle corn and hay drifting on the breeze. Workers were stringing the last of the lights, checking each bulb as dusk settled. A sound rippled through the fair, one long, low click. Then the fair's main lights died all at once. The town hall had never felt so quiet. When the fairgrounds went dark, everyone rushed inside for answers, but the old building's lights flickered once, then surrendered. Shadows swallowed the rafters. The only glow came from the exit sign humming above the back door. Martha's voice cracked through the dark. "Somebody fix this!" "We can't open the fair like this." Hank stood near the breaker panel, calm as ever, brushing dust from his sleeves. Jamie watched from the side aisle, heart thudding. The room buzzed with scattered voices, accusations, impatience, a few nervous laughs stretching thin. Then a new sound cut through everything. Footsteps, measured, heavy, familiar to anyone who had ever served. Admiral Raymond Holt, retired, respected, silver-haired commander of the local Veterans Council, stepped into the aisle. He wasn't an admiral anymore, not officially, but Maple Creek still called him that, out of habit and out of awe. The admiral stepped in, someone whispered, as he moved forward, shoes echoing on the hardwood floor. He stopped directly between Hank and the HOA crowd, lifting a hand for silence. "That's enough," he said, voice low but steady. "Let the man work." People froze. Even Martha took a step back. Hank knelt by the breaker box, pushing up his sleeve for room to reach inside. As he did, part of his faded navy patch loosened and slipped from the seam, fluttering down like an old leaf. Jamie felt his breath catch. The admiral figure bent slowly, picking up the patch carefully between his fingers. The texture was worn threads, frayed to silver. He turned it toward the dim light, studying it. "This isn't just a patch," he murmured. "This is a Navy technician's service marker." The HOA members shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else whispered an apology too soft to finish. The admiral crouched beside Hank, leaning close so only he could hear. Jamie saw it more than heard it, the way the old man lowered his head, the way the words shaped themselves in the dimness. He didn't speak it loudly. He whispered it. "Sir." Hank paused, hand resting against the panel, eyes steady on the dark wiring. He didn't smile. He didn't bow his head. He only gave a small nod, like acknowledging a truth he never needed to say out loud. Then he focused. He aimed the screwdriver the way a craftsman aims attention, not a weapon, sharp concentration narrowing to a single point. The tool touched metal with a quiet tap, a twist, another adjustment, a breath held by the room, and then light. The overhead fixtures blazed back to life one by one, washing the hall in warm gold. Cheers rose from every corner. Someone clapped Hank on the back before realizing he didn't seem the type to enjoy applause. Jamie grinned so hard his cheeks hurt. Martha stared, cheeks flushed, suddenly very small, under the brightness of her own mistake. Hank stood, dusted off his hands, and nodded toward the working lights. "Just needed a steady touch," he said. The admiral handed his patch back gently, with a respect that made the room fall silent again. But even in the glow, bright, warm, restoring, Jamie felt it. Maple Creek still had something left to fix. The next morning, Maple Creek felt different, brighter somehow, as if the lights Hank repaired had reached farther than the fairgrounds. Folks gathered along Main Street, carrying boxes, hanging bunting, setting up pie tables. And everywhere Jamie walked, he heard the same murmured retelling, that Navy tech saved the whole fair. Did you see how calm he was? Patch might have been faded, but the man sure wasn't. Stories grew the way small-town stories do, sideways, generously embroidered with pride. Jamie felt himself smiling every time he heard Hank's name spoken, with something close to admiration. Near the cider stand, the HOA members huddled together, looking more nervous than they ever had at any official meeting. Martha clutched a paper cup with both hands, twisting it until it nearly folded. They found Hank beside the bandstand, coiling spare extension cords so no one would trip on them. He did it without being asked, steady, quiet, the way he seemed to move through everything. Hank Martha started voice wobbling. We owe you an apology." He paused, letting the last loop of cord fall neatly into place. "You were trying to help," another HOA member said, "and we didn't give you room to do it." "That's on us," Hank nodded once. "Fair's running. That's what matters." Martha let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. "Still, thank you." He tipped his head politely, nothing more. Jamie noticed he didn't reach for the patch on his sleeve this time. Maybe he didn't feel the need to hide it anymore. Word traveled fast to the post office, the unofficial center of town news. By noon, a small crowd gathered near the bulletin board. Someone had taped up a fresh poster printed on heavy cream paper so it wouldn't curl at the corners. Fall Fair Helpers, featuring Hank Rourke, Navy Technician Reto. Jamie stood beside Will as people stepped closer to read it. A couple snapped pictures. A few nodded, murmuring approval. Will slid his hands into his pockets, rocking on his heels. "Some folks serve louder," he said softly. "Hank serves longer." Jamie watched Hank across the street, adjusting the last of the booth lights, helping a teenager secure a banner, holding a ladder. Steady for an elderly vendor. No announcements. No spotlight. Just doing the work because the work needed doing. A quiet kind of justice, Jamie thought. Not loud or dramatic, just right. He looked back at the poster, then toward Hank again. Something tugged at him, something unfinished, something important. Jamie swallowed once, gathering courage. He had one more thing to finish. The fair was in full swing by late afternoon. Music drifted from the bandstand. Children chased one another between hay bales, and warm light glowed across every booth Hank had helped steady. The air held that soft maple-sweet scent that only came once a year, carried on a cool fall breeze. Hank was tightening a loose bracket on the pie judging table when he heard small footsteps rushing toward him. Jamie skidded to a stop, breathing hard but smiling like someone who'd finally worked up to something big. "I made you something," Jamie said, holding a small cloth bag against his chest. "Took me all morning." Hank wiped his hands on a rag brows, lifting gently. "For me," Jamie nodded and opened the bag with careful fingers. Inside was a wooden patch, smooth-sanded until it shone, carved to match every worn thread and curve of Hank's faded navy patch. Even the frayed edge had been etched by hand. Jamie held it out, both palms steady. They mocked that faded patch. His voice wavered, but he didn't look away. "But I won't, sir." Hank's breath caught. He took the wooden patch as if it were made of something far more fragile than oak. A smile touched his face, small, warm, the kind that came from deep gratitude rather than surprise. The kind that stayed. "Jamie," he said quietly, "this is something else." A gust of wind swept through the fairgrounds, then twirling fallen leaves in a soft spiral. The chimes on the cider tent stirred, ringing a gentle note that drifted across the crowd. Hank looked at the wooden patch again, thumb tracing the carved lines. "I just thought you should have one that doesn't fade," Jamie added, "because you didn't deserve what they said." Hank rested a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. "I'm just glad I could help," he said, voice steady as the autumn breeze. Jamie grinned and stood a little taller beside him. Around them, the fair carried on community laughter lights glowing bright, because one quiet man had stepped in when it mattered. And if this story moved you, share it forward. The fair wound down under a gentle sweep of autumn light, and Hank stood near the bandstand as the wind carried the soft clink of wind chimes across Maple Creek. Still, the wooden patch Jamie carved rested warm in his hand, its lines catching the glow like a lamp in a winter window, quiet proof that kindness didn't need an audience to matter. Then Jamie's words echoed back to him, steady and earnest. They mocked that faded patch, but I won't, sir, and the moment settled over. Hank like a promise kept. Quietly, he pinned the wooden patch beside the old one on the fair's community board, letting both hang there as a reminder of the day light returned. And in that simple act, the town finally understood the truth: some heroes serve longer.